Think forward. Think Research Channel.
Hello, I'm Barbara Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to Behind the Code. In this series, we feature Microsoft employees who have achieved great things. And as your host, it's my goal to uncover their passion, insight, decision-making, wins, losses, and key learning points as they relate to their Microsoft career. For those of you who are not very technical, relax. This interview will not be about the technology, but rather about the person behind the code. Our guest today is Anders Hejlsberg. Distinguished engineer Anders Hejlsberg is chief designer of the C# programming language and a key participant in the development of the Microsoft.NET framework. Before his work on C# and .NET, Anders was the architect for the Visual J++ development system and the Windows Foundation classes. Before joining Microsoft, Anders was one of the first employees of Borland International. As principal engineer there, he was the original author of Turbo Pascal, and later worked as the chief architect of the Delphi product line. In 2000, Anders was awarded the Dr. Dobbs Journal's Excellence in Programming Award. The Dr. Dobbs Journal presents the award annually to individuals who, in the spirit of innovation and cooperation, have made significant contributions to the advancement of software development. So I'm pleased to introduce Anders Hejlsberg. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Coming. So Anders, you're pretty clearly not from around here. Where were you born?
I was born in just north of Copenhagen in Denmark. So yes, I'm Danish.
At one point in your career, you were pretty much more famous than Bill Gates in Europe.
I wonder about that. But
your reputation in the industry has been as not a nerdy guy. You know, there are pictures of you on sports cars and, you know, looking pretty spiffily dressed. So do you still have a sports car now that you're a family man?
Well, first, my wife would tell you I'm a nerd. But no, actually, the sports car went by the wayside a couple of years ago, and just 2 weeks ago we bought a minivan. So
you're losing points.
I'm a family dad now.
Okay, so the second question is, what was your best Bill G meeting experience?
Probably, it was fairly recent, I think. I think it was probably in January or February of this year. We showed Bill the stuff that we're working on called Project Clarity, which is C# 3.0 and some of the database integration work that we've been doing. And we had, I think, a half hour with Bill where we sat down and walked him through it. And afterwards, he wrote this glowing mail saying it was the most exciting thing he saw during his demo days and whatever. And that, of course, opens a lot of doors. And you know, so that was pretty exciting.
So what's the worst one?
Oh. Well, I guess, you know, I mean, I've been in many reviews with Bill, and he'll often let his opinion be known in no uncertain words. So there probably been a few in there. I remember actually also when I first took the job, or was in the process of you know, Microsoft made an offer and whatever, and at one point I ended up talking to Bill actually to deliver the news that I was going to stay at Borland, and that did not sit well with him, and I remember him saying, "Well, what's it gonna take?" He says, you know, so that was an awkward moment for sure.
A short meeting, I imagine.
Yes. Well, it was over the phone, but yeah.
Okay, more serious question. You are the chief architect in C# and the designer going forward in that that whole area, and you're a distinguished engineer. So, what is your job like today? Well,
my sort of primary day-to-day job is to be the chief architect of the C# programming language, like you said. But then I also have a dotted line relationship to the .NET framework. I participate a lot in design of the .NET CLR and the base class libraries. And then I get involved in a variety of different sort of initiatives around the company. I spent a little bit of time, you know, in the beginning of Avalon on a design team there, and so there's just sort of always something new.
So what's the most exciting part of your job?
I think it's I mean, right now actually we're having a lot of fun with C# 3.0, which is you know, the next version of the next major rev of the C# programming language, and I think I love doing the design work. We have a great design team. We have a series of meetings that we've literally had in the same room at the same time slot for the last 6 years. So there's a lot of continuity there and sort of tradition, and it's a lot of fun.
So let me ask you, what's the most frustrating part?
Oh, Microsoft is a great place in there. There's so many smart people, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing. You know, lots of people with lots of opinions, and sometimes you feel like you're just a broken record, you know, saying the same thing over and over, because there's so many people you got to convince. But it's good too, because it sort of filters out the bad ideas. They never make it through that machinery, you know.
When you came to Microsoft in 1996, at that point, you had two real big successful products. You had Delphi, and you had your Turbo Pascal product.
Right.
So you came as a pretty famous person. We had an opportunity to talk to Bob Muglia. Bob, of course, is the Senior Vice President of the Windows Server Division right now. And Bob, I guess, was instrumental in recruiting you to Microsoft.
He was, yes.
And he has some things to say about your career.
All right.
Well, you know, there are only a few people in the world that are really able to deeply contribute to the evolution of the development environment and languages at a fundamental architectural level. And I'm very clear that Anders is the premier person in the world in this, that he's the absolute top of a very, very elite pyramid in terms of how he thinks about the customer, in this case the developer, and what they can do, and how he translates his thinking into solutions that are just completely and totally unique. I'm going to go back to the very beginning, to Turbo Pascal and the work that he did there. An incredible language for its time, unbelievably years and years ahead of anything else that existed in the 1980s. And Delphi was equally the kind of productive thing. And he's taken that same set of talents and brought them into Microsoft and has applied that to the C# environment. And our customers are the ones who really benefit from that.
Any comments back to Bob?
Well, no, I'm flattered to have Bob say those things. I mean, to me, the thing that's actually always driven me is the desire to program. You know, much more than sort of the financial or whatever. Or I mean, I never really set out to achieve greatness. I just like writing software.
So how'd you get started?
Software.
I'm cutting you off there, but how did you get started?
I got started. Well, I was born and grew up in Denmark, and I got started at the high school that I went to, just north of Copenhagen, and they were one of the first high schools to offer, you know, make available a computer for students, and you know, it was sort of like the first 2 days the instructors were teaching us, and then the rest of the time we were teaching the instructors. You know, it was sort of very just go discover it yourself. And that was my first start, yeah.
Your family technical?
My dad's an engineer. He worked for Motorola for many years. So yes, definitely sort of an engineering-oriented family.
And we did talk to your brother, Thomas, who says that actually he taught you how to program.
Well, he probably got started a little bit before I did, yeah, at the high school. We were both at the same, he was 2 years below me. So yeah, I think he got me interested. So
you attended Danish Technical University, studied electrical engineering, but you didn't graduate.
That's true.
Any regrets?
No, I mean, sitting here, I can't say that I regret it. I can't say that I necessarily recommend it as a career path either. Yeah.
And then you started a little company.
Right.
Called Polydata, or I believe
Polydata.
you joined Polydata. And that was pretty much in the wild and woolly times in the industry, so the early days. So tell us about that.
Well, so when I started at the Technical University, for the freshmen, they do this camping trip where you go to some cabins and you go there with the seniors, or some of the seniors. And there was a guy there named Preben who liked to play cards, which I do too. And we're playing this game called Mausel, which is a German card game for money. And he didn't realize that I'd played that all through high school, and so he kept losing money and had to write IOUs, and so I had to get to know the guy, you know. And he was sort of, he and a couple of other friends were dabbling in starting a small company to sell computers. And I then got involved in that, and that was sort of the beginnings of Polydata. And this goes back to '79, yeah.
And you wrote a compiler at Polydata. How in the world did you write a compiler?
Well, I mean, back then you sort of taught yourself. So I started out, you know, this was a kit computer, a Z80 based kit computer with a 4 megahertz CPU, you know, and like 32K of RAM max. And I started out just writing. It actually came with Microsoft's ROM Basic, and so I wrote in Basic for about 1 day, and then and then I sort of moved to the more interesting stuff like machine code. And I wrote a bunch of stuff for that thing, an assembler, a disassembler, a little on-screen editor, and whatever. And then eventually ended up getting interested in writing a full language compiler. And I wanted to write an algol compiler because that's what we had been taught at our high school. But my friend was going, well, there's this new thing called Pascal. You really ought to check it out. And I go, oh, okay. And we'll look at it. And they go, oh, this is pretty neat. And so I wrote this little subset of Pascal, a little compiler, editor, runtime, all in 12K because that was how much memory you could put in ROM. And then we sold it like, it was like this little breadboard you could stick in, and then you could take the Microsoft ROM Basic out and stick our Pascal system in and turn on a machine, and you were sitting in a little on-screen editor. You could write Pascal.
This became Borland's product later, right? Turbo Pascal?
This was sort of the early ancestor of Turbo Pascal, yeah. And then it became a fuller implementation for CPM80, and then it eventually became a full implementation of Pascal for CPM80, and that's when we hooked up with the Borland guy.
You were one of the original employees of Borland. How did you meet them, and how did you find them in Denmark?
Well, so the guys that founded Borland, so many people don't know that Borland was originally founded in Denmark about a year before they incorporated in the US. And there was this small company in Copenhagen that we knew from trade fairs and whatever called Molecular Computer, and those guys wanted to get out of the hardware business because they were interested in software, and they had written a couple of pieces of software they had like something called Word Index for a WordStar, a table of contents, index generator, and whatever. And they have written these products in Pascal. They were using Digital Research Pascal MT+, which was a terrible compiler. At one point, one of my associates, or one of my associates in the company, met with them at another, I don't know what it was, a reception somewhere, and told them about this Pascal compiler we had, and they didn't believe a word of what he was saying, you know, and he says, well, why don't we give you an eval copy and you can check it out, and then they came back a couple of weeks later, we want to make a deal with you.
How'd you get to the US then?
Well, so we ended up building a royalty deal with Borland where they effectively rebranded our Pascal compiler, Turbo Pascal, and then that took off much more than anyone had expected. And eventually I moved to the US in '87, I think, because in '86 I think I traveled to the US 4 or 5 times, and it was just crazy. And my then girlfriend actually was interested in moving to the US, and so she sort of persuaded me to go.
So during your years at Borland, though, in the US, you had 2 really hit products. I mean, Turbo Pascal sold more than 1 million copies, and it was followed by Delphi. So you were there about 8 years.
Well, I think I started, with them in '83 and left in '96. So, I was effectively there for 13 years. I don't think I was formally an employee in the beginning, so it sort of depends on how you count, but for a good long time, yeah.
I think those years at Borland really were your, seminal work, learning to be an architect. And, to make sure that we get this all down, we have a little surprise for you.
Okay.
We've invited Gary Whizen, your development manager, to join us.
Oh, no kidding. That's great. That's good to see. It's gone good. It's been a while.
Thanks, Gary.
I was wondering what that extra chair was for.
It was for people who faint.
Yeah.
So, little facts about Gary while you recover.
Okay.
Gary was development manager at Borland between '84 and '98. And he actually has a pretty famous record of shipping a lot of products. But I guess his #1 job at Borland was the Anders handler.
And also ping pong coach.
Okay. So we're going to ask Gary first. What was it like? You had this Turbo Pascal product that was coming out of a stockroom in Denmark, and you finally met the guy.
Yeah, he was something of a state secret. I actually worked with Anders for about a year before I ever met him. Indirectly, he didn't know I existed because, I don't know, what they have you like in some kind of clean room or something. But
yeah, Philippe was very, sort of.
But I remember actually the day that he was coming. Well, previously we had had another European programmer that we'd never met come over, and that was Lars. And when Lars showed up, I mean, he looked like James Dean. He had a leather jacket, and I think he had some piercings, and he looked, like my teenage daughter would say, he looked hot. So next thing you know, we hear Anders, who to us was someone, we just admired so much. And when Anders, came in the room, we were all looking around for Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, and instead we got Doogie Howser.
Well, Turbo Pascal was quite an incredible product, I think, for those. I was slaving away in UCSD Pascal at the time, and you'd go out for lunch and dinner while it compiled. And the Turbo Pascal compiled really quick. It was cheap, it was $50. And it had a pretty...
we preferred inexpensive.
Oh, inexpensive. It was inexpensive. It was reasonable. Yeah. Okay. But it was a very impressive product because on its face, it was a very, very simple product. You could not have 72 manuals when you went to use it. So I need to ask Anders how that insight came to you to actually figure out to make a product simple to use.
Well, so the inexpensiveness was not my insight. That was the Borland insight. In fact, I thought they were nuts when they told us they were going to sell it for $50. The integratedness. I mean, actually, UCSD was a big inspiration of mine. UCSD Pascal, but even that was not nearly as integrated as we managed to make Turbo Pascal. And I don't know. It's just I mean, if you think about the development experience, it really is You write your code, and now you want to run it, and you just want the fastest possible turnaround. And if there's an error, you want to be put right back into the edit. In retrospect, it all seems very logical. Do you know what I mean? And all development tools look that way today. I don't know if there was a blinding insight other than that just seemed like the right way to do it.
Of course, it probably helped you only had 64K. Minus the operating system, it's like, to exit, load your text editor, type it, it was pretty cumbersome.
So Gary, was he a prima donna?
Was he a prima donna? You guys work with him. Is he a prima donna? There were special rules for Anders. I know that the U.S. government has a classified part of its budget for intelligence. I had a classified budget for bribing people to lose to him at table tennis. He worked at home 4 days a week. He only came in the office 3 days a week. For a total of 7. And I used to joke. Remember that you only come in for lunch and to play ping pong. That was. He never sent me to his car, to get a mink stole or anything like that. But, the thing about, I was thinking about this, the thing about prima donnas, you can build a whole production around them. So in the positive sense, we were able to, before I came really as a company, build essentially the whole company around Anders. I mean, Turbo Pascal funded the whole early days of Borland, and then it funded all the stuff that came afterwards. It's still, Delphi is still funding that company to a large extent. So.
Going to get to that in a minute. But Anders, did you feel like when you went to Borland and in the U.S. that you were starting to lose control to a bigger development team? I mean, what was that like?
Well, in the beginning, I actually did in the very early years work with. They had a little Copenhagen development team, some of the original founders, and I worked with Mogans, who wrote and Lars, who wrote the editor and the menu system for
which we lost the source code and still use it for years afterwards. We couldn't reassemble it except for with a beta version of azm.com.
Exactly. I think Borland was a big learning experience, though. Over time, I learned to be more of a team player, but I was very much a one-man show to begin with. I wasn't even at Borland. I was actually in Denmark, and the entire product team was in Scotts Valley, and I would just sort of write code and then mail floppy disks with FedEx. This is before internet existed, or at least was available to mere mortals. And back then, it was very much a one-man show. And I think at Borland then I learned to become more of a team player because, one-man shows just don't scale, or they only scale so far.
Well, Delphi then was the next big hit. That was a blockbuster that came out of Borland. And the question, during that time in the industry, though, the industry was moving from text-based to basically to graphical user interface type development environments. And did you guys just one day wake up and say, it's going to be Delphi, or was there something in the middle? And I guess either one of you can address that.
There were some misfires before Delphi, for sure. Yeah.
Well, nobody wants to work on a knockoff of something that someone else just invented. So, naturally, since Visual Basic had come out and shown this whole new way property-based programming, visual design using components, we thought that was very cool. We also wanted to do that. But, I don't know, a boss of mine wasn't real interested in that product. And since we wanted to leapfrog anyway, we worked on a pure visual product, which I still think we could have completely cornered the market on Fahrenheit to Celsius conversions and Celsius to Fahrenheit.
That project was called Monet, and the idea was effectively, at that time there was all of this talk about software ICs and plug and play, and you would just sort of have a visual designer and put down your components and then wire them together, and it all sounded great, and no one really thought about, like, does this scale at all? And so we built all of it. It's like what it's like when you're blinded by the idea. You start at the bottom and you're just getting all interested in the property component model and metadata and blah, 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 and building these little ICs. And it turned out that, you couldn't build anything with this stuff. And I sort of say that when it comes to visual programming, a line of code is worth 1,000 pictures, because you die a slow death in wires going from everywhere to everywhere,
Just look under your desk, all this stuff to connect your monitor, your keyboard, and your,
You're fine. Yeah. So Delphi had some interesting properties. It was an enterprise-based developer that you were going for. So you had client-server. You picked a name that has some database subtle connotation. I think Oracle might have been taken when you picked Delphi. But the idea was to go into something that was completely different and look at a different customer. So how did you get to that, knowing?
Kicking, screaming,
yeah.
fingernails dug into the carpeting.
I think originally we were really just going for visual development tools for client applications, and we didn't really think much about the enterprise database side. Back then, the big buzzword was client-server, or two-tier apps, if you will. And I think, kudos go to Zach Erlacher for making us turn this into a client-server product. He kept insisting that, no, we got to have an angle. We can't just be, a better Visual Basic. We got to have an enterprise angle. We got to appeal to the client-server market. And so we actually, I think we took like a 6-month schedule hit at least.
Well, actually, when we started the product, we were able to have the database stuff, the client-server stuff on the outside of our original product definition. Partly because there was no way we could have scheduled that complexity, and so we just said, you know what, let us do it's a lot of compiler work, a lot of linker work, a whole development environment. Later on, when it became time to, okay, now where do we really want to hit, it was unthinkable to ship it without client server, so. Yeah.
Is it true you asked Andrew to delay his wedding to ship the product? I heard you were kind of a tough guy to work for.
You asked, but
I have a lot.
I was asked.
Well, I'm really glad you don't remember it was me, because it was me.
Was it?
It's one of those things where you see, before the Senate, all these probably well-meaning people going and testifying that these things that they did because their bosses asked them to do. And actually, it turned out that Anders' wedding, which was scheduled after Delphi 1.0 shipped, once we added client server and said, okay, we're really going to do this, and came up with a new schedule, it happened to inconveniently fall in the middle of this new chunk of work we're going to do. So I really did actually go down and I went, at Borland you actually get pretty good at breaking bad news. There was a lot of difficulty at, management-wise. So it's like, I'm supposed to ask you this question. So yeah, he said no. Well, I think he said maybe his wife said no. So,
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I think that was
actually,
one of the few times where I made the right decision.
You were just shocked.
Okay, so this is a little tougher question. You guys are down there in Scotts Valley, competing against, VB, and, we were pretty serious in the business in 1994, around Delphi time. What was it like to work with us as a competitor? I probably should give this question to Gary.
Well, that's an interesting choice of words, to work with you as a competitor.
It was pretty cutthroat. Yeah.
It's a funny thing, though, because, there's people who do the business side, and they're doing the marketing, and they're out there meeting, their counterparts. And then there's the folks, building the stuff. And I think you know, we really thought we were building something really cool that solved real problems better than anything else we saw. In fact, some ways it still solves real problems better than anything else I've seen. And so we loved that. We loved competing against VB. We loved competing against VC++, against Borland C++. You know, because we thought, you know, we used to joke about the programmer bar. When you go to the programmer bar, there's, you know, everyone wants to be down in the C++ and where they're doing shots, you know. And it's like, you know, 100 people in the bar, like 5 or 7 of them can program in C++ and be productive with, you know, wizards and, you know, lines of code getting generated you've never seen before. And so we thought we were really building something that people could use. Yeah. So we loved it.
Wow. Any other memories you have of that, Anders?
No, I totally agree. I thought it was sort of a noble cause. You know, we were bringing a real compiler to, you know, to rapid application development, because VB at the time was interpreted only. And we were bringing a real compiler, a real object-oriented programming language, you know, and we just felt like it was such a good cause, you know, and it was such a great product. It was a lot of fun to work on.
Well, I'm going to let Gary go before you start reminiscing too far into the good old days at Borland. Gary, thank you very much.
Great to see you.
Yeah. See you after.
Right.
Thank you very much. So, 1996, came to Microsoft, and Delphi was a pretty big success at that point. And so, what was your first project?
When I first came, was right around the time, I think within 2 weeks of me joining, Visual J++ 1.1 shipped, which was effectively take the Visual C++ IDE and yank out the C++ compiler and stick in Java underneath. Lots of stuff needed to be done there, you know. I mean, the project system was not at all in tune for Java, and there was no visual designer, and there were a lot of things that were still missing. So I went to work as the architect of sort of the real Java development tool, the next version after that, which eventually was called Visual J++ 6.0.
But in the meantime, did you have any great vision that we were going to be able to go in and really make a huge change in Java?
I think in retrospect, I was probably a little bit naive about what I was stepping into here, because this turned out to be a battle of the giants, you know, Microsoft versus Sun, and the whole lawsuit that eventually ensued, and I was sort of naively just wanting to make Java a better development tool. I thought it was a very nice language, you know, a nice experience. I liked the idea of you know, having bytecodes and a controlled execution environment, but of course we could do a lot better for Windows programming. AWT is a terrible GUI framework, and so we were trying to do better, and we sort of got our fingers caught in the machinery.
Well, my experience on Java, I was the Java security architect for a while, and we were, you know, developing a security model for Java that we knew was going to work better for Windows. And I gave a lot of talks at conferences, and all I got was that Microsoft is co-opting Java.
Yes, embrace and extend, and oh yes, it was a lot of evil empire going around. So it was not the most inspirational period in my career, for sure. But
well, I think after VJ++ 6.0 shipped, which I think for people that don't know, that was kind of a gutsy move, because it should have been VJ++ 2.0.
Right.
So you jumped, you know, some version numbers.
Yeah, I think we all synced on 6.0. Yeah.
And Sun noticed. I mean, they immediately sued us for breach of contract, copyright infringement. And that time was really difficult at Microsoft, and I'm curious about your experiences, because it was a put your pencils down, stop.
It kind of was. I mean, I think we shipped in August of '98, and I think we got enjoined in October, September or October. So within months, the product was literally dead in the water. I mean, in terms of a future. It actually ended up doing quite well in terms of usage numbers, but you know, we had to go back and do silly stuff like put in a big warning dialogue, warning you are about to use Microsoft proprietary extensions. Are you sure you want to proceed? And you have to like check and press OK. And I mean, that obviously is sort of the kiss of death for sort of any kind of product, you know. So
what was it like for your team? The people around you. It wasn't fun.
It was sort of it was the worst of times, and in a sense, it also, as you know, became the best of times, because I think it gave us clarity, if you will, around creating .NET and around sort of taking control of our own destiny and building a platform that where we could truly innovate and where we could build the stuff that we needed to build for our customers, as opposed to trying to shape a competitor's platform, which effectively was what we were doing.
What do you think your biggest takeaway in terms of learning was from the experience with Java?
Well, I think you have to know, you have to be very sure about what it is you want to do with a product and what is the value proposition to customers and to yourself, to your company, to your organization. And in retrospect with Java, it was sort of a very odd position we were in, where part of the technology was built by a different company, actually, a competitor, and it was very hard for us to shape that technology to fit our customers' needs and to be sort of the best programming experience on the Windows platform. So I think, in retrospect, you got to be in control of your own destiny more than we were at that time.
Before I leave Java, I know what emerged from the chaos, but before we leave Java, if we had to face another Java as a company, I think you're suggesting embrace and extend might not be the mantra you would use for that.
Right.
But what do you think we could do better if we find a product like that on the horizon as Microsoft?
It's a tough question. I think ultimately the best way to deal with these situations is to invent, and make sure that you have the right value proposition and whatever. And in retrospect, I think the value proposition wasn't right, when it came to Java. It was not exactly clear what Java's future was and how it tied in with our existing products and so forth. And really it was sort of an adaptation of a technology that wasn't built to best serve our customers. So I think in the end, what we ended up doing with .NET was the right direction.
How did the whole thing, in your recollection, .NET emerged, C# emerged, doing a new programming language. Who led that charge? How did we decide to do a new language?
Oh, that was a painful birth. There was a lot of sort of hand-wringing about, building a whole new developer experience. And I should say at the time, I think Microsoft was sort of in trouble with developers at that juncture in time. There was a reason why developers were going in droves to the Java platform, because the development environment we had on Windows at the time was effectively, it had many names: COM, Olay, ActiveX, DNA, whatever. We kept rebranding the same bucket of bits. But it was sort of a very low-level experience of all sorts of registry and GUIDs and H-results and interfaces and stuff you had to deal with, and horribly complicated. I remember going to the PDC, the first internet PDC, I think. It must have been in '95, with Victor Stone talking about IOLA, la-di-da monikers, and everybody was just completely glazed over because it was hopelessly complicated. And simplicity was sort of getting lost, And developers were voting with their feet, so we were kind of in trouble. And so, of course, there was a lot of hand-wringing about where do we go, and I think there were two camps. There were the evolutionaries and the revolutionaries. The evolutionaries are, well, we got to fix COM. I don't know what we got to do to fix it. It seemed to me a pretty big fix, but like add classes to COM or whatever. And then there were the revolutionaries, and I was pretty firmly in that camp that sort of said, we got to build a new development experience. We got to clean up all this stuff. Of course, we need to interoperate with it, but we got to have a fresh start.
Well, I know in the CLR, when we announced the CLR, the whole idea was to not tie people to a language. The idea, I think we even announced the COBOL, Fujitsu COBOL compiler along saying it's one of the, compilers. But so back to the C# language itself. What inspiration, where did you start with developing a new language?
Well, I think you sort of learn from what you've done before. So for me, having worked with Pascal for many years, and having worked with Java, and having also programmed, of course, in C++ and other sort of pure object-oriented programming languages like Smalltalk, and you come with sort of a bag of tricks that you feel are right, and then you also come with sort of a memory of all the things that didn't work, and you sort of apply that, and then you pepper on some new things. That sort of seems to be the formula for for creating programming languages. I always say that in that business we all sort of stand on the shoulders of giants, because there's so much that goes before, and it's it's a fairly glacial process to develop a programming language as opposed to just sort of if you look at software in general.
So C# is pretty impressive. What do you think is the best feature of it? If you had to pick something out of that and say, this is the thing we did absolutely best, what would that be? What's special about it?
Well, I mean, to me, it'd probably be a geeky thing like the unified type system. The fact that you can start out looking at the language, you can just go, everything in this language is an object. And then later on, you can sort of learn about the finer distinctions about value types versus reference types. But there's this conceptual simplification that you just say, everything in here is an object. So in that sense, it's a true object-oriented programming language.
Well, why do you think that you were chosen to be the architect of that particular one? Before you answer, I have a surprise for you again.
Yes?
We had an opportunity to talk to Peter Sulich.
Yes.
And ask him, he was working with you at that time on the original design team, and he had a pretty quick answer for that, so I'll ask him first, and then we'll come back and ask you. Okay.
I think it's because he's really a man of very good taste when it comes to programming and programming languages and so on. And not just a man of good taste, but also a man who keeps the right set of priorities in mind. And so, maybe it's also because he's Danish, you know. He comes from Europe, he has good taste. I mean, you can really see some of that. But he has also adopted an American pragmatist point of view, you know. If it works, then that's better than if it doesn't work, right? I mean, sometimes the Europeans come up with stuff that's stylish but doesn't work. But I think C# is stylish, it does work, and it does actually a great job. So I think it's a good combination.
That's great.
Kind of hard to beat.
That's funny. That is funny.
So we found in our research some Andersism.
Okay.
And stylish, see here, good taste, eloquence, simplicity. So tell us about those in the context of C#.
Well, it's definitely true. The simplicity has always been something that I value. Whenever I look at what's done well in the world or in our field, it seems like all of the really good ideas are simple ideas. Like you look at something like HTML, it's really sort of at the heart of it, a very simple idea of markup, and you know what I mean? And you can explain it to someone on the back of a napkin in 5 minutes. And I always think that that's sort of the hallmark of a good thing. Quite often, and my litmus test quite often is, if you can't explain to me in 5 minutes what this thing is supposed to do, then it's probably not a good idea, you know, because the simple ones are the ones that win in the end.
How does good taste fit in?
That one is trickier because it's totally subjective, right? I mean, what is good taste? I guess for some reason I can I have a good sense for what works for programmers and what doesn't. The way I don't know, you can sort of feel whether they're in a programming language, for example. Ideally, there's only one right way of doing something, and I'm always bothered when there's more than one way. I'm like always trying to eliminate that other way, so there's always a clear road. Do you know what I mean? And I think a lot of programming languages are really more like, well, you know, this seems like a good, well, some people might want to do it this way, some might want to do it the other. Let's have all four of them. Do you know what I mean? And at every juncture, unless you're a super smart guy, you're not going to know which way to go, or you go down the wrong way, and then you can't back up later. So
I think an Andersism, boy, that's not easy to say. One of those is customer empathy. You seem like you go and you talk to customers and you build in a lot of what they really think about it into the product. So how do you do that? Do you go out, see them, do talks at conferences, some combination?
It's a lot of talking at conferences, but I think it is ultimately, you have to understand. So first of all, I think it is super important that you keep your hands dirty at all time. Even though I do a lot of language design now and I'm not actually writing the compiler like I used to or whatever, I still try to write a lot of code. Because when you get your hands dirty, you can sort of feel what works and what doesn't. Once you stop writing code, it's amazing how quickly you float up and become sort of one of these architecture astronauts, you know, where anything's possible. It's just a matter of people, isn't it? Or throw more people at it, and it's not really like that. And you know, customers don't have infinite resources, and there's something about communicating directly to programmers by understanding the problems they feel. That's when you can really connect. People, I think day to day we're just bombarded with commercials for stuff and whatever, which don't really appeal to how we think and how we really work. Do you know what I mean? And so I think people like the fact that when someone actually understands programming is talking to them. Do you know what I mean?
And question for you about your team.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned at the very beginning that you have a pretty unique way of working with your team, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be interesting to sort of share that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's unique about your team? How do you pick them?
Well, first of all, I think it's a wonderful team of people. I mean, I have the deepest respect for the people that are on our design team and on the C# team in general, even on .NET for that matter. But our little team, first of all, we have pretty high standards, I think, which can be intimidating when people interview and get a bunch of no hires or whatever. But the process that we've sort of settled on is a very interactive process. We have these design meetings that go Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 1 to 3 o'clock in the same room, like I said, since 1999.
Wow.
And we just sort of have a very fluid agenda. Every meeting starts with me or someone just sort of writing up on the board, what are we going to talk about today? What's the most important thing that we've got going on right now? And in the process of talking about that, maybe we've resolved one design issue and two others pop up at the bottom of the list, you know, in the process of that discussion. And we just keep reiterating, you know, and there's not a set agenda. And I think we have about 5 or 6 people. That seems to be the magic number. And the great thing about it is you walk into a meeting and let's say you had a great idea that day, you know, and you want to discuss it. And because it's the same set of people for such a long time, everybody has the same context. So you walk in and in 2 minutes, you're having a deep conversation and technical discussion about this particular feature. You don't have to spend first 45 minutes level setting, and then in the last 5 minutes of the meeting, you get in your question, and then, you're out of time. Do you know what I mean? And there's a lot of that often happens because there isn't a I wouldn't say formalized, but there isn't a recurring design process. It happens just sort of in fits and starts. Do you know what I mean? Where we're trying to make it continual.
Seems to be pretty successful for you.
Yeah. I mean, it works for us for sure. And I mean, I don't know to what extent it scales to super large teams or anything, but it has been great.
So you're the judge though when there's a technical battle.
Yeah.
You're the guy.
I sort of say I'm the benevolent dictator, and I rarely exercise my powers. Well, I guess maybe some of the team members here might, but rarely, only every 15 minutes, I would say. No, I mean, often, I think, you know, with a team like that has so much history, I think things have a way of sorting themselves out because we all sort of understand where there's not a lot of chest banging in our meetings, which you often find, especially in sort of smart corporate cultures like Microsoft. You know, lots of meetings where people just have a bunch of points they need to make, you know, to appear smart. But we're sort of over that, you know what I mean? And we can just sort of have a real conversation about the pros and cons, and then at the end of the meeting we can sort of all go, yeah, I think we sort of favor that one. But we can totally see the advantages of the other one. Do you know what I mean? So it's very rare that I have to make a call.
Well, what do you do if you have someone on the team that isn't really living up to those standards?
Well, luckily that hasn't happened that I can recall. I mean, I think if people typically know if there's something wrong. I mean, they themselves know. And I think when there have been situations like this, you know, it's not like it would come as a complete surprise to the particular person involved that they're sort of in over their head or whatever. So we've never really had a confrontational situation like that occur.
You never voted anybody off the island, is what you're saying?
No, I can't say that I have.
So what's next for C#?
Well, so the thing that we're going to talk about actually very soon in 5 weeks at the PDC is this work we've been doing with deep integration of databases and general purpose programming language, in particular C#, but also VB. effectively, we've sort of tried to tear down the big disconnect that has existed for God knows how many years now between databases and general purpose programming languages, where today when you write an application, when you're writing an enterprise application, you're really not just learning to code in C# or VB, you're also learning to code in SQL or XQuery or some domain-specific language. And there are a bunch of mismatches between those two worlds. And we can make so much progress by doing some deeper integration, and that's what we've been working on for the last couple of years.
What about the future of programming languages? Got any views on where they're all going?
I think, well, I mean, it's hard to say, you know, but I think if there's a trend, I think where you're going to see new stuff happening is more in the domain of declarative programming than in the domain of imperative. Yes, and so when we code today, or at least the way generations of programmers have been taught to code, is not just saying what they want done in their program, but how they want it done. They write a x equals y plus 1, and then a for loop and an if statement, and they literally move the data around manually, and all the computer does is just does it quicker than they could have done it, you know. But it's very much about the how and not so much about the what. And I think over time we need to move more towards the what. We need to be more declarative, and we just got to state, hey, I want this set of data operated on in this particular way, but you go figure out what the best way to do it is, because that way we can start taking advantage of multiprocessors and whatever, because we're not specifying exactly how we want it done. But it's a long process. But I think we are sort of slowly making some advances, and certainly some of the stuff we're doing in C# 3.0 with language integrated query is a step in that direction, because you are programming in a more declarative sense. You know, you're just sort of saying in a query, I want, you know, from my customers where the state is California, I want this and that, and then I want to group by that and that. But you're not actually writing the code in a for loop to iterate over all the customers and so forth. So
back to our promise not to be super technical here. I hear that you're kind of you play as well as work. So tell me a little bit about your family.
Well, we've got 2 kids and a third on the way, hence the minivan. Our oldest son, Axel, is 4.5, and our daughter, Mia, is 2, and we're expecting a third in November. So that keeps us pretty busy. I'd say in between that and work, there's not a whole lot of time left over.
Any sports?
I play golf.
I've heard about ping pong.
I do, yeah, ping pong. I haven't played much of that. I play golf and I play squash occasionally, and that's about it. Yeah.
Well, now final question on this one. Advice. If you have to talk to people in the audience and you're basically going to give them a little bit of advice about programming languages, about a career at Microsoft, you know, just in general, what would you give them?
I think, well, what has worked for me is you know, do what you like, and the success will follow. I mean, you got to be passionate about what you do. You gotta do it because you want to do it, and then that's how great things happen. I think I don't think it's very hard to sort of force yourself to do a job that you don't really care about or whatever. So it's you've got to be passionate about it. You know, that's and certainly. For me, programming has been a passion. I would say I have a much more balanced outlook on life now. I don't work 80-hour work weeks like I used to, and I have a family, and you know, but yeah.
So you'd say balance in all ways.
Well, I'd say balance now, but you know, I can't brag of having had a lot of balance early on. I mean, I worked like a mad dog, you know, and it was just I was obsessed, you know.
Anders, we always finish these with a set of questions that we ask everybody, so we can compare responses. But the first one is, how would you describe your work to someone who is not technical?
Basically, I create tools for other programmers. I write the software that other programmers use to write their programs. So just as, like, say, Microsoft Word or Excel or whatever is for knowledge workers, well, so do we build a tool set called Visual Studio that is effectively the tools that programmers use to write software for Windows.
What else would you compare in life? What would you compare to producing software? Some other.
I think writing software is sort of like, I mean, to me, it's the ultimate mind game. You know, you get to create this phantom world that doesn't really exist, but you get to control all the parameters of this world. So if you're a control freak, it's a great little thing because everything does exactly what you want it to do, and you can keep it all in your head. And it's just sort of this gigantic chess game, you know.
Okay, this is a fill-in-the-blank question. You know, you're a computer nerd when? Say you get out of the shower having thought about a great new syntax for lambda expressions, and and you can't quite remember if you washed your hair. Okay, other than computers, what are you passionate about?
I think my family, I think would be the one thing for sure. Wine, I like wine. I like playing golf, but I'm not sure I'm passionate about it. but and then, you know, my work, yeah.
Well, the one final one for you is we ask everybody to draw their favorite data structure.
God, I thought this wasn't going to be geeky.
Yeah, do this so it's not geeky, okay? You don't mind, do you? And then you have to sign it, so it will be memorialized. So
Okay.
you have to show it, by the way. You have to turn it around, okay?
Okay, well, I don't know what. How about, well, actually a data structure I've found useful is the circularly linked list, which is a fairly simple data structure, really. You have a bunch of objects. Say you have 3 objects on your list, and each object has a next pointer, so it points to the next in the list. And then sort of the traditional way to store a list is you would have a pointer to the first element in the list, and then the last one would point to nowhere, or have a null pointer, and then you could traverse the list. But the problem with one of these is if you want to insert at the end of the list, you got to go all the way to the end, and so effectively the longer the list grows, the longer it takes to insert elements. A neat little trick you can do with linked lists like this is instead of storing a pointer to the first element, you store a pointer to the last element in the list. And then you have the last element point back to the first element of the list. Now you can still traverse the list. And in order to find the first element of the list, you take the pointer to last, go 1, and then you can go da-da-da-da-da until you hit the end pointer again. But now, in order to insert at the end of the list, you just insert right here. You make this guy point to the next one. And so that's, you know, effectively a constant time operation. And inserting at the front of the list is constant time too, because you can just follow the link to the beginning of the list and then insert in front of that. It's just a question of where you put this pointer at the end. So I've used this data structure many times. It's actually pretty darn useful. Okay. All right. There we go.
Okay. Thanks, Anders.
You're welcome.
I think it's time for questions from the audience.
Why did you decide to leave Borland and come to Microsoft?
There were many reasons. I think, first of all, I had been there for 13 years, and I felt I was sort of starting to feel like it was time to try something new. I also had, at the time, a growing disagreement with the management at Borland about where the company should go. I always viewed Borland as a development tools company, but Borland always sort of had an internal struggle about there was what Borland is, and then there was what it wanted to be. It always wanted to be something else, and that sort of came to a head at that time, and I felt like we should actually sort of redouble our efforts and focus on development tools, but management wanted to make the company into, I don't know, more of an enterprise something or other. I don't know exactly what the direction was at that time, and so that left me. That made me leave. And I've never regretted leaving. I mean, I think it's been a great ride here, and you know, I've been very fortunate to be in a position to, you know, I mean, it's not often you get to have Microsoft put their might behind a whole new programming language. So it's been a lot of fun, you know, to do that.
Another question.
So when you originally designed C#, it was obviously a pure object-oriented language. But if you look at 2.0 and subsequently some of the things you've got planned for 3.0, it seems like there's some functional stuff creeping in there. I'd like to hear from you what you believe the future of object orientation is. Do you believe that that's something that's going to hold true, or is it over time just going to just be one feature of a much broader set of features of any given programming language?
Right. I actually think object-oriented programming is just becoming a tool in many ways. I mean, if you go back 10 years ago, it was a religion. Now it's a tool. We've all sort of understood what it does and what it doesn't do, and we can sort of program with that paradigm without being overzealous about, and it must all be objects or else, I mean, we sort of have come to grips with what's good about it and what's not. You're right that there's a lot of stuff we're looking at now from functional programming languages, which is where a lot of the efforts in academia are focused today. And I think there's interestingly now a lot of things that we can start carrying into mainstream programming languages from places like Haskell and ML, and also older school functional programming languages like Lisp and Scheme and so forth. And I think it's really fun to sort of be at the forefront of that, which is, largely with C# 3.0 is where a lot of the inspiration is coming from. But it's fun to take that and then applying that to a very pragmatic problem like making data integration better in a general purpose programming language, and then just sort of discovering how all of these ideas that exist in functional programming are very, very applicable in that space, and putting them to good use that way this is one of the things I enjoy the most, I think, about my job.
Another question.
So can you describe a personal weakness that you've had during your career, and then how did you grow to get beyond it?
Okay. I think my weakness was, in the early days, was for sure that I was very much a one-man show and very much a control freak. I could just not let go and let anybody else touch the pristine code that was whatever product I was working on. And I mean, when I first came to Borland, it was like that, and like Gary said, the code just sort of magically appeared, from his point of view. And I learned at Borland to be more of a team player. I worked with Chuck, who's here, for I think 8 years, and we sort of ended up building up a great teamwork. And over time, I've become much better at that. And today, today I think of myself as more of a team player. I think it's on the other hand, I wouldn't say that I'm happy that I was that way, because it also caused me to set my quality standards very high. And it was enforceably high because I could just do it myself. Do you know what I mean? But it doesn't scale at all. And so you got to learn eventually to become a team player. So that was probably sort of my biggest weakness. Yeah.
Okay, the last question.
In programming language features, how do you tell when to stop? At first, programmers don't understand objects, and okay, they understand objects, but they don't understand generics. And now, okay, generics they do, but not lambda expressions. And so when do you know? And you can go on and on, right? So.
Yes, and I don't know what the answer is necessarily, other than you be very careful whenever you add something at all times. But eventually, there's going to be too much, or well, actually, I don't think there's going to be too much necessarily, but there are going to be a lot of things that are no longer used because they gradually, new paradigms have happened. Like generics will definitely, over time, cause other language features to sort of phase out. Do you know what I mean? Hopefully, we can isolate it to just be library issues where we just sort of slot in new libraries and retire old ones and keep the language the same. But for certain things, I think you be very diligent about not adding something that unduly ages the language.
Thank you, Anders.
All right,
thank you very, very
You're
much.
Welcome. You're welcome.
Think forward. Think Research Channel.